I think naturally we look for things that are the end all be all to a process, right? And so like somebody will look at a number like revenue and be like, "Oh yeah, like that's just everything encompassed in
Yeah.
how you got to where you're at."
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, well, no, that's not. You didn't look at all the hard days it takes to get here. You didn't look at the deals that are falling through. You didn't look at all these other things that got us to this number. But I think as humans, we like to see a conclusion on things and a nice, tightly wrapped bow of like, oh yeah, this was just the overall increase, overall decrease, whatever it is, like the overall number. I think there's like a slight preference to seeing like one big summation.
But yeah, man, we're back. Another Founders Drive.
Yeah, Founders Drive.
Kick us off with some of these productivity hacks.
Productivity hacks?
Yeah, man.
Oh, gee, AI, man. AI. 100x your productivity with AI. That's the best productivity hack.
You don't need to do anything when you have AI.
Yeah, I mean, it's, like everyone's saying, it's 100x, 1000x.
A million X.
It's like, why? Okay, it's like, if you're actually 100x, it's funny, like, what does that actually mean? Like, if you actually sat down where it's like, no, like, this was actually 100x, so many things would be so different. It's like, it's so hard to actually achieve 100x that people just start throwing these numbers around and,
yeah,
I don't know.
It's like a cool headline, 100x.
It's a cool hook.
What does that actually mean?
Yeah, I don't know. I saw this article about Meta releasing a new metric to I guess measure productivity.
Okay.
It's called DAT.
Okay.
So apparently it's basically the time it takes for a developer to submit a diff, submit a pull request.
Okay.
And so they're tracking it from the time that the task is assigned all the way until it's merged in.
Okay. What does DAT stand for?
I'd have to look that up.
Okay. To the uninformed, what's a pull request? What's a diff?
Gotcha. Yeah. So like software engineering, anytime you want to make an update to the code base, all the good software engineers put their code in a repository where you can kind of have version control, right? So you make an update, you test it, looks good, you can commit that to the version history, the source control, where you can say, hey, like this is a version 1 of what I built, this is working, and then if somebody wants to come over and make a change, they can start where you left off, make the change, push that up, and now you have a new starting point. So basically, the time it takes for a developer to get that change into an environment where a user can see it, timed starts when you get assigned the task. So the entire time it takes for the task to be assigned and then essentially delivered in the software engineering context.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good measure because it doesn't look at how many lines of code it was. It doesn't look at like how much of AI you used. It doesn't look. It's really just like you got the thing done. How efficient were you getting the thing done? And the only thing we care about in efficiency for that metric would be time.
Okay.
Right? If you can do something that's complex in a shorter amount of time, you're more efficient, regardless of whether you used AI or not. So I thought that was interesting. How it's more of a abstract, I would guess.
So you think it's a good thing?
I think it's trending in the right direction.
Okay.
Versus the hey, productivity is now lines of code.
Yeah.
I think that was probably before, and it probably still is at a large number of places. But now moving to this time to diff metric, I thought was pretty interesting.
It is interesting. I don't know if to me it sounds still in the same space as lines of code.
Okay.
I think there's this impulse to want to be able to track the work of softwares, but I don't necessarily think that this solves that problem. It might be a step in the right direction, but I don't know if it solves a problem because software engineering, the task of software engineering is to bring efficiency to software. I mean, that's a big, actually, I'll say almost in any task for people, being able to do it efficiently is the main goal. If you're playing basketball, scoring efficiently is a really important thing. I was just reading this article on Jokic. It's the end of the season, and so they're looking at who's going to be the MVP.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people are talking about Nikola Jokic's efficiency. SGA, who plays for the Thunder, he's a guard. He's also very efficient. But my main point is that efficiency is prized as being like for people. As people, like internally we like efficient things.
Yeah.
And so, but how you get to efficiency isn't always efficient.
And really the question is like, we all know efficiency is what we're striving towards, but then how do you compare two people on the basis of efficiency?
Right.
And that's really the metric.
And people like to optimize, especially in the workforce, people like to optimize around efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, they like to strive for it 100%.
And so,
yeah.
or I should say, people like to optimize around metrics and making that metric efficient. But that metric might bring the overall efficiency of delivering software or appealing to your end users more difficult in the software context.
I mean, I think that's really apparent when you start talking about like, hey, I'm going to compare these two engineers based on their lines of code. It's like that's not an efficiency metric, or it's not a good efficiency metric. It is an efficiency metric, but it's not the right one to look at if you wanted to compare two engineers on like how efficient they are. And so like going away from like what are you outputting into like what is the impact of what you're doing, I think is also pretty important. But then you get people who like do a bunch of impact, they don't actually write any code.
Yeah. Let's weigh the benefits of that metric against the downsides of that metric.
Okay.
So what does this actually end up solving? How does it actually end up being a benefit to the engineers, the team that they're working on, and then the overall the goal of a company? Not just Meta, but say another company, puts that metric in place. It says, hey, we're gonna be measuring the time from task to diff. And that's what we're measuring now, and that's like how engineers are going to be evaluated on. What is the optimistic, ideal outcome of that metric?
And for anyone who's not technical, I think there's a good analogy here to cycle time with like TFS or Jira tickets.
Yeah, TFS is Team Foundation Server. It's a way of just managing work.
Yeah, and so a cycle time there would be task got created, got assigned, it got delivered and marked as done. And so the same concept is there when you're doing task planning, moving stuff on the board where it's like, hey, which status is this in? You know, is it new? Is it in progress? Is it done? Is it tested? All that stuff.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's the same thing when applied to a software engineer's code. And how efficient are you? And then it's really just saying, what's the cycle time to your diff? To me, like, the pro that we kind of already went over was like it's abstracted away from the physical hands-on keyboard. Like you hit 10 buttons, is that more efficient? Like that, it steps away from that a little bit more. It moves into the whole cycle time of like taking into account, hey, like this is a task that requires this much engineering effort, but in this organization requires 3 or 4 different meetings, right? And so now that's going to now be captured in time to diff. And so I think that might be another pro.
Okay, so like you capture some things and just to add some context, we're coming from the frame of mind that there are companies out there that are just measuring the quality of an engineer based off of the lines of code that they're writing.
Yeah, there was a metric that I was personally graded on not too long ago actually was how many lines of code did you write and how many pull requests can you get done in a week. And it was not super aligned with the value that I was bringing to the team or the company in terms of software engineering. But yeah, it will pick up those things that aren't just, hey, did you write the syntax in your keyboard?
So you could make the argument that it's a step in the right direction. It's a way to include more factors that might be ignored by just looking at the lines of code and the number of pull requests that an engineer makes.
I think that's one argument you can make, absolutely.
Okay, that's interesting. What about, like, is there anything else that comes to mind?
So I mean, in terms of those are the pros, cons. I guess time to diff. I mean, if your responsibility at an organization is to produce code, it's probably a good thing that you're tracked on producing that code.
Yeah.
So cons, I mean, the only con that I really see is that, like, I don't think anybody really likes being measured.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just one of those things that I think as a leader you have to do it because you can then get a good sense of what's actually happening. But as an individual, I felt this, right? It doesn't feel good when someone likes to pull out a yardstick and be like, hey, we need to, we need to measure against everybody else. But
Yeah, I like measurement when it's clear and I feel like it's actually accurate of the job at hand. If it's ignoring things that are just relevant to the job,
a poor metric, yeah.
if it's a poor metric, then to me,
It'd be very frustrating.
it can be frustrating,
Yeah.
especially when you're in a situation where it's like your livelihood depends on it.
Exactly, your
you know?
family, yeah.
Right. But being somebody who's like, I've been in sports, or I played sports for a lot of my youth, and I played in college and in track and field. It's all performance based. Like the whole idea is how can you move your body efficiently in these high performance tasks, whether that's like a long distance run, whether it's a jump, etc. And then can you execute that? And so numbers was a huge thing. There was these boards of how far people have jumped and run that we would look at every day, every week, whenever there was a meet.
Like a leaderboard?
A leaderboard, yeah. And we were just looking and saying, okay, well, like what's here, and then how do we optimize around that? And that goes into the lifting, the time that you're spending doing all that stuff. And so that is something I like. Numbers, but I think in the corporate space it's different because numbers don't encapsulate everything. And again, I'm leaning a lot on sports right now, but
it's a good analogy.
But you see like how it doesn't always encapsulate everything.
Yeah.
Like numbers don't encapsulate everything, and that's the trade-off whenever you find a metric is, okay, is this even relevant? Is by optimizing around this, are we ignoring other things? Like it's a balancing act. And you hear a lot of people in sports too where they're like, there's numbers guys and then there's people that are eye test guys, and obviously the extremes of both miss things, right?
Yeah.
One sport that's very, very, very analytical is baseball.
Yeah.
Like I started getting more into baseball this year, and they have this. The MLB has a site called baseballsavant.com, or there's some variation of that URL, and they track everything.
Yeah.
Like it's amazing how much they track in baseball. And baseball probably has the longest history of being very analytical.
Statistical.
And what's interesting is like a lot of other sports just still aren't on that wave.
I mean, you had the whole entire movie that was built around the stats being brought into the game at a spot where people were like, no, I can just see it.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I think it's also really important to call out the fact that I think naturally we look for things that are the end all be all to a process, right? And so like somebody will look at a number like revenue and be like, oh yeah, like that's just everything encompassed in how you got to where you're at.
Yeah.
It's like, well, no, that's not. You didn't look at all the hard days it takes to get here. You didn't look at the deals that are falling through. You didn't look at all these other things that got us to this number. But I think as humans, we like to see a conclusion on things and a nice tightly wrapped bow of like, oh yeah, this was just the overall increase, overall decrease, whatever it is, like the overall number. I think there's like a slight preference to seeing like one big summation number.
Yeah,
know,
it's easier to, because here's
something is appealing about that.
Yeah,
where it's like, oh, you wrapped it all up in
just
just
one metric that you need to look at. None of them matter.
Right.
But like, then we don't have to go down this rabbit hole. But there are situations though where like that is helpful, where one metric is encompassing of another metric, and there are tests for that where like there's covariance and like different things like that, but there are a lot of situations where they like you're looking at different numbers because they represent different things.
Yes.
One thing that I think is pretty interesting is the idea that numbers aren't reality. Numbers are reliable indicators of reality. And so when you're seeing a number, it's not like, okay, this is it and that's everything and this tells it all. It's slightly different than the point you're making, but I think they're in the same realm.
No, I think so, yeah.
But it's almost like, okay, here's a number, and it's my channel for understanding what's going on the other side of that and what's actually happening over there, because it's a number, a metric is really just trying to tell the overall picture. And I think that's the question that still has to be in mind, where it's like, okay, even going back to the initial thing that we were talking about, if you introduce this new metric to see how long it's taking to go from task assignment to completion, it has to be done in the context of the actual outcome that we want to have happen.
Yep, and it has to be in the context of the team in which it's applied.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I think going even across teams, you'll see wildly different numbers.
Yeah, that's a fact. And it's like, and so if you're optimizing for how fast we can get a story done, that's vastly different than how fast or is our customer happy with this thing that we produced. Because if you optimize for speed and then everybody's optimizing for speed and then you produce something that's not good, it's shit work, then
it doesn't hit your objective.
It doesn't hit your objective, and it ends up being worse. And so that's another thing. It's like metrics need to be taken in context and be used towards a specific outcome.
Yep, I think something to call back on that I said it previously was like, I don't think people like being measured, and you correctly, I think, picked up on the fact that they don't like to be inaccurately measured.
Yeah.
I think people love to be accurately measured to see like, oh yeah, this is this is my FICO score, that's a good one.
Yeah.
This is my revenue, this is whatever, it's like a good measure. But when it's inaccurate, things just kind of, they feel targeted.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting, so this DAT, diff authoring time. So the time it takes you to get to a diff, your diff authoring time, is also very nuanced in the software engineering world as it's being applied, because you have, let's say you have a team of like a regular enterprise team where you have 2 or 3 juniors, maybe 1 senior, maybe 1 architect. They're all software engineers, but their responsibilities and roles are vastly different. And that actually will change their DAT, their diff authoring time, depending on what they're optimizing for, right?
Yeah.
Like a junior engineer, you would expect them to see a whole bunch of commits, maybe a whole bunch of PRs, really learning the code base, maybe pushing out a bunch of tests. With a senior engineer, you may or may not have that. You probably would also see a lot of deletes, removing stuff from the code that's like, hey, this isn't, this, or I refactored this and made it better, so now it's reduced lines of code.
Yeah.
But then on a grand scale, you'd be like, oh, that person's not efficient, so it's like it's very nuanced into how you actually want to measure this stuff.
It reminds me of Alberta, what's her channel again?
Alberta Tech?
Alberta Tech?
Yeah.
Those videos that we were sharing about how she was talking about how, like these engineers, like they don't do any work.
The ghost engineers.
Yeah, the ghost engineers, they don't do any work. And I'm sure that there are definitely some ghost engineers that don't do anything. But there are also a lot of people that if you just measure their changes to the code base, the volume isn't that high. There's not a lot of numbers of lines of code. And so in this world where we're starting to look at different metrics, this might include some more things, right?
Exactly.
But there's also a space where, okay, that senior engineer, they took 2 weeks to make this one thing, this one change. And it's not a lot of lines of code. It's not a ton of pull requests. But it's still not getting captured in this DAT metric because it took a long time to make a small change.
Yep.
But that might have required talking to a couple different engineering teams, making sure that we're aligning with the marketing. It might have taken a minute to go back and say, hey, we have to go and make sure that we're documenting our stuff right because there was missing information here. And all of that stuff is necessary. But if it's not being encompassed in this DAT, then it's still going to be invisible. That work's still going to be invisible. That's not to say that all of that stuff needs to be done. Maybe it's trying to weasel out and say, hey, we're spending too much time in meetings and we want to reduce that. So if you're in a situation where this is going to take longer than expected, then communicate that or whatever, because we do want to keep our delivery time shorter. Right. But if that's not being explicitly called out in the goals, then it's gonna get missed, and now it's like, well, you're taking forever to deliver this metric.
What actually happens, just like any big corporate job, is that people will start to try and game the system to say, oh, this is what you're measuring, then I'll make sure to
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
match that metric.
Yeah. Oh, I'm gonna have the fastest commits in there. But
Yeah.
and so again, I think like the biggest takeaway for me right now is they have to be done in context.
Yeah, and they're very nuanced.
Yeah. And so, but I do think that there is just kind of leaning on some of the positives. There is a world where when you have a focus on speed of delivery, that can, especially if there's a problem with delivering on like time or delivering fast results, or people taking like longer because they add in things that are out of scope.
Yep.
It might force somebody to say, okay, if we want to optimize around speed to delivery, then we just have to check in work, and you start to say no to things that might get in the way of actually delivering things fast. And so there is a benefit, especially if it's optimized and that's the context that they want to have this metric be evaluated.
Yeah, I think all of these things, like, I always assume good faith.
Yeah.
But I also am realistic, and I know that for a lot of teams with non-technical leadership, it's going to be reduced to the worst possible implementation of a DAT, where it's toxic. You know, it's just super toxic. I think, and that's a really slippery slope, because you have people who are in these organizations who aren't technical, who are just taking what you're saying at face value and being like, well, their DAT was low, so we got to put them on a PIP. It's like, all right, like there's so much more to the story that you're missing.
Facts.
That, you know, end up totally ruining some companies and teams.
Yeah.
Just something to call out with Alberta. It's so much fun how like life imitates art, and vice versa. She was talking about how there are 10x engineers who are essentially ghost engineers who really don't do anything. If you've seen Silicon Valley, they actually had a team hired by Hooli who their explicit instructions were, we're going to hire you for the next year so you don't do any work. And a story just came out from Google, who they're doing the same thing. They hired a bunch of AI researchers purely so they couldn't go to their competitors. So they are just sitting on talent. They're basically just saying, we're going to sit on this talent, and you're allowed to be a ghost engineer because we don't really want you working for NVIDIA or Intel or pick your competitor.
And you hear about stuff like that, but it's always interesting when you hear, like when you actually see, okay, that's actually what's happening right there.
And it's like, well, what are their DATs?
Zero. It's like, does that get caught up in the metric, or like, man.
That's very interesting.
So a thought on that too. Is, and I don't know if we said this before here, but I know we've talked about this, is efficiency should be low effort though.
What do you mean by that?
And so efficiency, it should be low effort, maximum impact and output.
That's like, your definition of efficient.
Yeah. And so I think sometimes, and I guess like that would be encapsulated in a speed to delivery like metric. But I'm thinking about in the whole ghost engineer and the 10x engineer. It's like, if you do have somebody who doesn't really do much, but when they come in, their impact is just like huge. Like they're not putting in a crazy amount of effort, but when you measure their impact, it's like, oh shit, like whenever they produce work, the outcomes are really, really good. Then like that's efficient by all means.
And that's totally plausible to be someone who writes little amount of code and has a huge impact, and so you are very efficient, and you should be seen as valuable to that company. You know, and too many times I've seen it where it's like, well, you didn't write enough code, so now you're not productive.
And I think
that's not true.
I think the through line with all of this is you have like making sure that the context is always, context is key. And context is king. And so in any situation, it makes sense. It makes sense, and it's the smart thing to do to evaluate where this metric fits in the bigger picture. Because honestly, it's like data points and their reference points for constructing how you're actually viewing the world. And when you do that, then it still comes down to anybody who's in a managerial position should be, their skill is insight and their skill is decision making for a group of people. And so,
or it should be,
right? It should be. And so being able to say, okay, here's all the data points that are going on. This is what we need to do now. This is how we make a decision to move forward. Makes sense. Like I was thinking about how this might apply in a sales space versus just, tech.
Yeah.
And a great sales team is going to be tracking a ton of different metrics in the whole pipeline, and that's a good thing because then you start understanding, okay, we're bottlenecked here, or we need to increase, lead flow here, or we need to do X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
To make sure that we're accomplishing our goals. That's good, but then there's if it's actually being optimized for the full goal, like the actual goal of converting more customers or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
But there are times where if you're just looking at the metric, like our follow-up numbers or our referral numbers, you might end up hurting a relationship with somebody because you're trying to optimize a metric.
Ooh, that's super important. Yeah, so like double click into there, like I could just imagine being on a sales call or a sales floor, sorry.
Yeah.
And being like, hey man, did you call that person back yet? It's like, well, I talked to him last week and he said to call back next month. Yeah, but like you need to call him back. It's like, well, if I call him back right now, he's gonna be pissed that I called him back before I told him I would call him back.
Right. And it's like, yeah, exactly. And it's
and
where is that line? Because it can get a little tricky, and this is where I think middle managers, when they're bad, they're middle managers. Yeah. Middle managers, when they're good, they're leaders.
Yes.
They're people they're coaches. They're people that put their people in a position to win, and they can see that subtlety of like, okay, from on high right now, the numbers aren't looking that great, but do we make our situation worse by acting right now versus not? Because they might be like, yeah, well, you didn't follow up with this person, that's why things are wrong. When in reality, that's just not it.
Yeah.
By you waiting, by you waiting, you might get you might get 5 referrals, but by pushing, you might get no more referrals for the rest of history.
Exactly.
And it's like, where is the balance between this person being like lazy and not doing their job versus this person understanding the nature of the situation and making the right call?
Yeah, and then how do you measure that?
Yeah.
Because essentially in that scenario they're being the most efficient they can be.
Yeah.
And then how do you measure that? And that's very interesting because I think it's all about, how much autonomy do you have in your role? Mm-hmm. How much responsibility are you given to make sure that you're not just being dogmatic with the rules, and like you're applying them in a way that makes sense for the situation.
Yeah.
There's too many people that aren't flexible in their positions, and end up just killing morale and making a worse client experience because they're just pushing these metrics. I've literally been on the receiving of calls where I'm like, hey, I told you to call me back next month, and they're like, yeah, I just got going through my pipeline. I'm like, well, then take me off the pipeline.
Yeah, I don't want to be part of this. What do you do? And this actually brings me to the whole thing of productivity, which we were talking about before.
Yeah,
it makes me think about how, and like the big number that you were talking about before, everybody wants to look at that one number, revenue. It tells me everything. That's the only thing I have to focus on.
Right.
I think a lot of times when people come up with metrics, it's as a way to shortcut thinking. Like thinking can be expensive, especially in the corporate space. And
they're all
in the
lazy,
business world, right? They're all lazy. No, but I think it's just the nature of people. Like, it can be draining thinking about things, and so if you can just look at a number and not have to think about it, then that's the ideal, right?
And you feel like you got the whole story.
Yeah.
If you can look at a paper and say, yeah, I got graded a B+.
Yeah.
It's like, cool, but then you miss the fact that he said your conclusion is complete crap.
Yeah. It's like, okay, and I'm just like because like
the conclusion's like completely off, but it's like, the rest of the paper is good enough as a B+. It's like, all right, I'll pass.
Yeah.
But this would not hold up in court, or this wouldn't hold up in a business setting.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting. You have to be very nuanced, especially around productivity.
Yeah.
And efficiency, I would say.
No, that makes sense. And extending off of that, from somebody who's like maybe in a managerial position, it's like, okay, did you hit these numbers? If you didn't, then we're not even gonna like have a discussion right now because you're not hitting these numbers and I'm not looking for context. It's like heuristic. Like it's like a shortcut for thinking, and the goal is like, okay, if I can get a better analysis here, then I can go and think about other things, or I can take on different tasks that might be more beneficial, might be more leveraged, etc.
Yeah.
But in reality, I think the numbers actually, when used right, give you a deeper look into what you're doing. So the baseball metrics people, the sabermetric, those people, they're not, or at least the people that I talk to that are really numbers driven, is they're looking through a checklist of a lot of different numbers. It's not the one that encapsulates everything. It might be 30 different things, and it's, before I make a move, I'm going to be looking at all of these things, and then I'm going to decide how I think about this thing or how I feel about this thing.
Yeah, because they all have different weights.
They all have different weights, and then that's how I'm going to go move forward. But reducing it to one number can blind you to a lot of things.
Oh yeah. Yep. And that's a perfect example.
Right? And it's actually, the real thing is, like, the whole DAT thing should be introduced alongside of lines of code. It should be introduced alongside of pull requests. It should be introduced alongside of the
Cycle
ultimate
time.
outcome,
Yeah.
cycle time, the ultimate outcome, and then relative measures, because, you know, there's a lot of different factors. And ultimately, like, a good manager, I think, is taking in all of that and then coming to a conclusion. And then they can speak to all of those different things when they're justified, when they have to justify their decision to whoever it might be, somebody who's above them, somebody who's below them, somebody who's like a peer, etc.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that hits the nail on the head, honestly. And I think there's a lot of people in corporate space who could learn a lot from just watching this and just thinking deeply about, are you measuring the people accurately? Are you measuring people efficiently?
Yeah.
Because that is part of your responsibility. And if you're not, you're doing those people a very big disservice.
I agree.
Not only to their career, but probably also to their mental health.
Yeah. I mean, I agree completely.
Yeah.
I agree completely. Man, there's a lot there. So DAT. So I wonder if they because Meta also said that they're going to be replacing a lot of their
fact checkers.
Their fact checkers. They said that they're going to be replacing a lot of their mid-level engineers. So the mid-level engineers also get evaluated. These AI engineers also get evaluated on DAT. Are we having them compete?
Right. Yeah. I guess only time will tell. I guess we'll definitely keep our ears and eyes open for news coming out of Meta and how it actually impacts how people will want to work there. Because I think when people do this, you start to see the changes pretty immediately in terms of, like, all right, who's actually there you go. Who's actually applying, who's staying, who's leaving. You know, you had that one Google engineer a couple of years ago who was like, we achieved AGI, I'm scared of it, I'm leaving Google.
Oh, yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
Whatever happened to that guy?
Yeah. And I don't know if we're quite at AGI yet. That might have been a little premature. But
It certainly was premature.
Google has been making a huge push in the last couple weeks with their AI functionality and features.
Yeah, very impressed with that. I saw, and you know, I think there's going to be some more stuff coming out soon where they're going to completely rewrite how we're going to benchmark these models. There's too many people that are cheating against the benchmarks, but
give them benchmarks, numbers, metrics.
It's like, yeah, if I know what the question's going to be asked, I'll just train on the question.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm really excited to see the kind of efficiency benchmarks that we're going to see coming out of Google in the very near future, because they're becoming the leader in some of these things, along with Anthropic, Meta, and even like Amazon too. But
yeah, it took them a little bit. I mean, they got the things rolling with the Transformer paper, attention is all you need, and then OpenAI took that to another level, and then, you know, we fast forward a few years, and then this is where we're at. And Google, I don't want to say they were late to the party, but they definitely weren't as on the ball as you would expect for them having all of that data, having all of that
engineering talent, the money, the resources.
Research, yeah.
And it definitely feels like they took the foot off the gas a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think they're going to correct that pretty soon.
Facts.
Yeah, man, this was a great episode.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, if you guys are watching this, you guys are interested in anything we're talking about, like, comment, subscribe down below.
And help us optimize our metrics. We're trying to get those numbers up.
There we go. And we will,
that's how you'll be evaluated.
that's how we're going to be evaluated.
Yeah, and if you don't, then we're gonna fire you as a listener and a subscriber.
Yeah, we're gonna pip you as a listener. Awesome. You guys have a great one. We'll see you in the next one.
Peace.
Peace.